so much for coming on. This is actually our first time talking together. I really appreciate it's. Look, I'm a verbose guy, but talking 24 hours by myself might be a stretch even for me. So I really appreciate you taking a chance and coming on with me. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
So can you do the audience a favor? Can you talk a little about yourself and your channel and where to find you? And then we'll jump in talking about the election and things like that.
Sure. I'm a satirical cartoonist. I also do live streaming on a YouTube. Everything is made by Jimbob. I'm on my like fifth Instagram account, so I'm a fairly censored cartoonist, but that just comes with the territory. I actually wear it like as a badge, of course. And yeah, that's kind of what I do. And now I'm just getting into more discourse with other people on panels and such.
Yeah, excellent. I'm supposed to tell you, my producer Aftershock said you did have your camera on earlier, and it's not on now, so he didn't know if you knew that, but it doesn't matter if it's not on. That's cool.
Yeah, no, I would rather it on. I gotta, not sure where the settings would be.
What'll happen is people will worry that you're just so much more handsome than me, so I instructed you to turn the video up,
is it on the, let's see here? There we go.
Wait. There he is. What's up, man?
How's it going?
Yeah.
How's it going?
Good. So yeah, I've seen you. Me seeing you has been on the Crucible debates you've done on the Crucible, which I think it's very good. And you can't help but see. I fancy myself someone who tries to be a humorist myself in some ways, and I think satire and comedy is one of the greatest ways we could point out these authoritarians. And so one of the things I really wanted to talk to you was about. How did you get into satire, and do you see like power in that and pushing back against people in positions of power and authority?
Yeah, how I got into it. Well, I was always like an artist of sorts. I just didn't know what to say with my work, and I got into doodling and doing comics of very superficial things like Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones and all sort of pop culture stuff. And it wasn't until I started criticizing Obama, who at the time I had voted for because I was a default sort of liberal Democrat in Los Angeles. I was also doing some like stand-up comedy and learning the craft of jokes and stuff. So it started to merge together. But once I realized the power of a meme, a single frame, ideally, that can just completely cut through all of the noise, all of the articles, all of the long-form discussions. And I realized that there was a weapon there that I could utilize. And at the time, I knew the power of memeing and comics, but I didn't know exactly what direction I was going to go in as far as what I'm going to say. But being that satire basically reports on absurdity, we're at a point in time where to be a good satire comedian or whatever, you just honestly report reality, and then you're a satirical artist, right? So
yeah. Well, it's so I was an amateur stand-up comic in that I did open mic nights, but I never got paid a dime. So I just got drunk and made a fool of myself. But I was always like class clown, like I'm a jovial person. Comes with being a big guy. You got to be jovial, so I love comedy. Stand-up comedy to me has always been, and many of the stand-up comics that I look up to would hate my politics. They would be huge left-wingers, right? Like Lenny Bruce, Bill Hicks, people like that I looked up to, George Carlin. I like Doug Stanhope. So I have a run the gambit, but to me, the thing that always appealed was sort of the poking the bear, the thumbing your nose at authority. And I think that, though, when I got into debate, I was really interested in using logic and persuasion to convince even people that disagreed with me. And what I'm realizing is, it's exactly what you hit on now. We're getting to the realm of absurdity that's so bad that all you could do is laugh at these people. Not all of them, but so many of them. The only weapon, you can talk until you're blue in the face about reality and about evidence and about how ridiculous their position is. They don't care. They just double down. And I think that's why you're so effective, because it's like, at some point you just have to be like, the only thing to do is to laugh at you so everyone else could see how absurd you are.
Absolutely. I think that tactic is really accessible to most people. That's why what used to be comedy was you could be right or left or middle or whatever, and you could unify the audience, even if they were separated in culture or politics. The point of the comedian or the jester is to poke fun, so everybody is the subject of the target. Now, with this kind of like new tactic of shielding people, whether it's minorities or ethnicity and whatnot, suddenly they don't get to be the targets, which is actually a disservice to people. It's actually a service to people, and it's actually, ironically, more inclusive to make fun of all people, all groups, all individuals, all entities. And that's kind of been, the attempt has been to take that away. I have a term for it called premicide, which is, it's not that jokes can't be told. It's actually more controlled than that. You can't even tell the truth of the premise, let alone the act out of the joke. And I think if you can control premises, that's equivalent to controlling narratives and paradigms. And that's kind of what we're seeing through media, whether it's the medical narratives or the war narratives or the left-right sort of ping pong game narratives. I think comedy allows you to see through at least the fake part of that. If there is a real part of that, that's another discussion. But I think that's the service that comedians do. And they've tried to take away the service, but it's only made comedy and humor more in demand, which is great.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like, again, we can talk about specifics if you like, but one of the things I've said for a long time, there are all these truths that we all intuitively know that we can't talk about. There are the obvious ones about sports and gender and sex and things of that nature. But one of the ones I remember saying was in the 2016 election when you had Trump going against Hillary. And there was this narrative that it was like, well, being a woman running for president, it's such a huge disadvantage, right? And all of us know that's not true. For any votes that Hillary would have lost being a woman, she was gaining an awful lot by breaking this glass ceiling. Similar sort of with Obama. Any racist that was like, well, I'm not going to vote for Obama, he's black, probably wasn't voting Democrat anyways. I doubt that they were going to, fill their ballot out for Joe Biden if it would have been him instead. And so it's frustrating because they enforce this not just through culture and, like you said, not even allowing you to discuss the premise, but when they control your language, they control your thoughts. And now we see that they're being even more blatant. They're just telling you on these big platforms, you can't even discuss this stuff. You just can't. It's bigotry. It's, the latest example is John Fetterman. Like, you can't even discuss that he's medically unfit. I don't say so with any animus towards him. It's a terrible thing. That sort of thing, it's a fine line. And I wondered what you thought about this. On one hand, I work with people with disabilities. Illness and things like that is very serious, and your heart goes out to anyone, even those you disagree with. But how can you not make fun of this situation? There's no appropriate response. Like, I could sit here and be like, well, it seems it'll be difficult for him he can't even speak without the use of computers. It'll be difficult for him. That only goes so far. The idea of just being like, are you shitting me? Like, do you see this guy? How do you draw that line between, like, you're being truthful out there, but you don't want to feel like, it's not that necessarily what you're mocking that you always like have animus towards the particular situation.
Well, to speak to that particular thing, I think part of the an asset for, let's say, a controlling class is to be able to gaslight and categorize, have a monopoly on the categorization of insane, incapable. And so if you speak about that stuff objectively, suddenly, that's no longer a tool for them. In other words, to be able to say someone's completely insane, if you can do that powerfully through the media, you're going to try to protect that wielding sword. You can't just let Rob or anyone else talk about this stuff broadly because that seems to be a tool. That's one of their offensive tactics. They have defensive shield tactics, and then they have offensive tactics. I think the insanity thing actually reaches to a lot of different things, whether it's gun ownership or whatever authority you're given. They could throw out the "you're kind of crazy" thing. I mean, they've say what you will about like someone like Kanye. It's really easy to just go, "You're crazy," move on, right? Even if there's like some truth here and there in what he's saying, or it doesn't matter who it is. But that's a tool. So that's one thing. What was the second question? It was that sorry, I forgot
because it seems like there are people that find it distasteful to kind of like say, oh, well, this is an illness, you can't make fun of it. But the stakes are high enough. We're not talking about a guy who's just on the bus with you. We're talking about a guy who wants to be one of the most powerful people in this country. So I'm not mocking his illness because, make fun of people with that illness. I'm mocking the situation. And how do you like differentiate and explain to people like, this isn't making fun of disabled people. It's making fun of this situation and what people in power are trying to force you to ignore.
Well, if I were speaking from my own point of view, as far in contrast to like just an objective view as a viewer without any biases, to be honest, I think there's a level that I cast upon all of the ruling class, anyone who gets up the ladder of power. Actually a psychopathic element involved, and I don't mean that like everyone's Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean that like properly psychopathic, like seeking power and control. And I don't think you can get away with it. And I believe that that you can't actually fully participate in a way where you gain any power unless there's something else going on. That's my conspiratorial lens. I save it until I'll go on that side of thinking, and then I'll investigate from that lens and happily be wrong. But I kind of look at it from a wider perspective than as you laid it out, as far as like what that machine is, right? In general, I look at it from like a paradigm perspective, not as this set of operations where good people can kind of get in there and do something. I think there's kind of a paradox. It's almost like the libertarians really wanting to get a libertarian in power. There's like a contradiction sort of embedded in it. And I find that that's actually where I draw some of my humor as I look at these things and I go, where's the absurdity and the contradiction or the paradox? I guess not all paradoxes or contradictions necessarily, but I look for the humor in it. And I kind of, honestly, I see a lot of this stuff as like WWE level entertainment, which is another topic I maybe get your take on. Is before we could always say that entertainment had some overlapping part of the political world. And it's not like insane to think of. We storytell, we tell stories. We need, you need to be a statesperson, a statesman, someone who speaks well. Yeah. And to be able to do this, and they get trained to do this. But maybe there was a time in our generation, we were younger, where maybe the spheres of politics and entertainment crossed over and created like a marquee shape. And you go, oh, there's a blurred line. We can't really tell. In my perspective, it's almost like these spheres have completely entangled themselves, where how do you sift through entertainment versus politics, especially with all of this technology, deep fake audio, the fact that there is a propaganda machine that's available, maybe per pay to play level, where you can just pay and get a narrative in the gumball machine of media, let's say. I'm fascinated with that because it's a little bit more of a complicated matrix to maneuver through from a commentator's perspective, like yourself.
It's amazing, right? Like, think about it this way, right? Like, so we've always had celebrity that ended up in politics, right? You could go back to Reagan. There are people, at the local levels, and even that made it pretty powerful. Then we had Arnold Schwarzenegger, as governor, Jesse the Body. Like, it's interesting, the connections to professional wrestling, to politics. Like, Donald Trump himself was involved. Linda McMahon, Vince McMahon, who runs the WWE, his wife was secretary of something. I forget. But yeah, it's very interesting when you see that. But think about it this. Be honest with yourself. If you truly were blackpilled on sort of politics and you're like, let's be honest, the parties suck, nothing's going to change. Isn't there an argument that you could make for like, fuck it, put Trump in. At least it's entertaining, right? Like, yeah. There's, and I think that gets to the truth of what you're saying, that there is a lot of that. I think there are people out there that meme, the power of that meme culture going into the 2016 election, like there was an energy to that where you could feel that's like, well, shit ain't boring now, right? It's not your same old like Bob Dole up there like, well, I respect my opponent, but this totally was just like on fire,
Yeah, no, I think there is something to that. I mean, I would even go as far as saying, vote for the comedian, right? And you have to determine who that is, because I actually kind of appeal more to local stuff. I'm not black-pilled completely on politics because at the local level, it's demonstrable that I can myself, my family, friends, people I know can impact direct not only politics but the local schools in my area. So I think the national level or even the world stage, it's very appealing to people to interact with because it's like the biggest game. It's like the Olympics of politics, and it's constant. and it sometimes draws people away from their locality. And I think the local is where a lot of the power is.
Yep.
And then you could expand that to state, if states hold their power. I don't agree with, theoretically some of the philosophical consequences of that. But, at a pragmatic position, you know, getting your power localized. And if we expand that just to the state and you maintain that power, you could at least move around and change things or leave. And there's still this freedom to kind of like to maneuver. Whereas I think the national and the world level is very much like the feeling like I equate it to like being at a horse race where you're there with so many people and it's loud and you're screaming and you have your number and you have your horse and there's a name for the horse and you love that horse and you saw it in the paddock and it's doing well. You had a feeling and then you're screaming and you think screaming and thumbs up actually impacts the race, right? And maybe there's some weird metaphysical thing where it does, but the sensation seems to be the outcome that that people are kind of pursuing at that level, because there's no real direct, maybe we could argue a vote and then there was a president and because of the president, but that's a little bit more broad. I'm talking about like direct influence. It's very much to me like a horse race, whereas at least at the local level, we're the jockey on the horse to some extent, where we're not just in the crowd, but it's fun. I'm not saying don't participate, because I actually think it's fun to participate in something that I kind of reduced to WWE entertainment.
It is. Like I got my start in debate was arguing with my friends and stuff about like sports. Like who's the best pitcher, who's the best hockey player, who's the best wrestler, like that sort of stuff. I like that. To me, that's entertaining. The reason I do my show, this is not my career. I have a job. I have a family. I do the show because it is entertaining to me. I hope to affect change in a positive way. I hope my audience likes the show. The moment it becomes not fun for me, I'm done. Like, that's not my career. And, so I don't begrudge anyone who's involved in politics for the fun of it. It's exhilarating. Just like cheering for your favorite sports team could be exhilarating. You're right. The question is, how much of an impact do you have on it? And I think you're absolutely right. Even before politics, right? The most important thing you could do is your friends, your family, being involved in that level of things. And then certainly, I would say the most understated political victory that we've seen from my side in a long time is the absolute trouncing we see in many of these school boards across the country. That's going to have more of an effect 20 years from now than who wins the Senate race in Pennsylvania. I guarantee it will, because stopping sort of this insane indoctrination of children and getting people that are like focused on like, I don't know, math, reading, civics, as opposed to we're going to teach you that, your genitals define you in the wrong way and you have the wrong skin color. I think that will do world's good. So yeah, you're right. There's this exhilaration that comes at the top level of politics. It's not as sexy to be like, yay, I voted in my local school board election. Yeah. But in many ways, that's more important.
There is also an aspect of the national and world level where you can emotionally participate and rhetorically participate, but you don't really have a connection to responsibility. It almost like eliminates some responsibility. It's like we partake in a part of it where we feel virtuous in how we participate, but we're also kind of like, it's them. There's some other thing happening, and I'm going to guide it, Whereas when you are a father like I am and you're in a local area and you go to the school and you talk to the teacher, you're actually talking face to face with a person who has to respond directly to your questions. Are you teaching this nonsense I said? What nonsense? I'll list it. And they're like, no, we're not teaching that. I'm with you, right? You get this interaction that you don't really get to get. Maybe you can get it on Twitter, but it's not gonna be the same. There's no holding to account. You can block, right? We have this this tension between interpersonal speaking, where like even in this I consider interpersonal, like I can't just block you. I could, if we disagreed, and that's useful sometimes. Some people are crazy. You just want to block them. But that local thing it's still what people kind of desire, where you can actually measure your impact directly with people, and then further measure the impact in policy based on your interactions with direct people, because they have to look in your eyes. They have to actually.
That's right.
Deal with, oh, wow, that is really a person. Whereas online, it's really easy to not consider it. Even I'm guilty too, where I just,
sure,
vague, abstract people, a mass of people, right?
Well, I've had this situation like where you get chippy with someone on Twitter, and then I'll be like, "Why don't you come on the show?" And even that level of Twitter to on the show, we're still not face to face, but it often goes much better because it's like now you can see the human that's in front of you, right? And it's different than just words. And like if you're wondering, like, well, if you can't comprehend it, think about it this way: if you have, if you got a wife or a husband or something, did you ever text them something sarcastic and it's totally lost in the text because all of your nonverbal, like your body language, your tone, all of it's lost. So you'll be like, yeah, sure. And then your wife's like, what the fuck was that? What did you just, and you're like, no, I didn't mean it that way. Right. That's sort of what it's like. The more personal, and there, I've heard people talk about this. There's this sort of like, you might get punched in the face, right? If you're saying things like in an up close personal level. And that's sort of like a characterization of what we're talking about, but it's different. The closer you are, the real relationships of face to face, it facilitates more productive conversations. And so not only do you have the ability to make real change in real issues, but you're more likely to have sort of a conversation that matters. Whereas, at the level, it gets worse as you go to the levels. Like you do what we're doing now, except say it's contentious, and then you do a panel where there's 9 people. That's even worse. Then you do just like yelling at someone on Facebook or Twitter. Each level of that digresses to, basically the loudest chirper, the person that's just some bot or being paid for by, the DNC or the RNC. They're getting millions of, interactions on Twitter, and it's just shit. It's just nothing. It's just red meat with no thought behind it. And the worst sin of all, and maybe you'll agree with this, is it's not funny. Like, I can handle the bad faith shit if it's like, okay, it's funny. I say that all the time. The Groypers or someone will give me shit. They'll be like, "Oh, you're fat and you're balding." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't mind that. Just make it funny, right? Like, do something funny with that,
Yeah. Actually, there's something interesting. There's like a correlation between the short bits on Twitter, right? They're like headlines. It's like someone writes a headline and then everyone else composes an article of maybe other headlines within the article, and then it's this whole thread. Similarly, you cram in that kind of quick bite take on even the mainstream left and right media. If you get on Tucker Carlson, it'd be like amazing because you represent maybe a worldview or a take, and you could probably get some goodies in there. But you're only getting goodies that equate to what? 30 seconds, 2 seconds, and then they can cut it. And it's kind of like this is why this long form, this alternative reporting, commentary stuff is kind of dangerous to both right and left, as far as not politics necessarily. That might be a consequence, but just their control over the focus of our minds, right? And so I see it's a big problem for a lot of these industries who have such a dominant position for so long, right? Technology just keeps now the disadvantage is that there's just more information, good and bad, and things do actually get smaller in bites if you don't do this kind of long form stuff. You just get a version of that cut together, taken out of context, and it becomes memes. But then you wonder, well, to what extent do we get into the war of memes? And that's where I come in, is that there is a war of memes, and I don't mean memes just by this, the cultural reference of like a photo with the things on it, right? I mean memes like ideas that are transmitted through mind to mind, culturally through language, and that how powerful that is, because that's all what's happening. That's exactly what's happening regardless of the platform or the time frame. But if you could be effective in sending it through and getting it accessible to people, you have power, and that's when they kind of start deleting you, because it sounds silly. It's like, how could you delete a cartoonist, right? I've got scribbles, they're not even well drawn. They look like an amputee drew them. They look like I taped like crayons to someone's elbows and said, go. And I just I just send it through, and people share it so much because it hits the target. Hopefully I hit the target most of the time. And
it's fundamental.
It is dangerous to them.
Yeah.
So I'm breaking in.
Look at this.
I'm breaking in for just a second. I broke in for just a second so that I can announce right here on the show that Jimbob and Vegan Gains will be going and slugging it out soon on the Crucible. It's also news to Jimbob, so I wanted to make sure that I announced that without even checking with him first, like a jerk, right? But he does like to eat those vegans, doesn't he? So
I saw that the other night. Yeah.
yeah,
Nice.
vegan gains. That ought to be really good. Just thought I would bust in, completely derail this conversation for no particularly
Great.
good reason, and then run away. See you later, guys.
I will
Oh,
see
thanks,
you.
Andrew.
See, Andrew's better in small bites too. You know, I
Yeah.
don't know, the long form's his strong suit. No, I thought of you the other night. I was watching you do the vegan debate, and you had the picture of meat behind you. So in debate, I did policy debate in college, and it was super left wing. And there were the one school, Binghamton University in New York. They only offered vegan options when you went to their tournament. So the head coach for Boston College was like one of the only right wingers in the entire debate community. On his own dime, he set a barbecue up outside like the parking lot, and so those of us few meat eaters that were there were able to partake right in front of these vegans. It was very satisfying.
That's good. That's
so
a part
I
of
thought
debate.
that. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
rhetoric.
Yeah,
That's like performance rhetoric.
yep.
Like
It
not
certainly
even
is.
words needed.
One of the things I did, you know, it's along this line, is I had a roommate, cool guy, he's vegetarian. He wasn't super pushy. He's just like, hey, don't eat KFC. They torture their animals. So we never really got into it. But one day I was eating a burger and he said something to me. He's like, let me play you this audio of cows being slaughtered. So the next day I went home and weed eated it and recorded it. And so when he was eating his salad, I'm like, you know, listen to the pain. You know, all of those dandelions being munched up, you know.
I'd be
yeah,
like, I'd be like, if we remove the vocal cords from the cows, right, and it didn't harm them to do so, would it be okay if they're just, you know, not?
Yeah, right,
squealing?
right. What's the threshold? I've never debated veganism. I saw you debating it. Andrew asked me would I be interested. I was like, I'll debate anything, right? But that's the first thing that comes to mind. Like, well, what's your threshold, right? Eating a life's bad? Well, plants are live. So what separates? What is it uniquely you're looking at from why it's okay for me to eat this kale, but it's not okay for me to eat this sardine? Or then you have what?
They don't really have it, and if they do present a threshold, it's arbitrary because not even all vegans agree on the threshold. Like, for instance, I think it was Synth who came on at the end who was asking our good friend Porsche. He said,
He's
"Well,
great voice.
you can eat, you know, you can eat it if you're, you know, if you're gonna survive, you know, you can kill it if you need it, if you need to eat it." And Posh used the example of, well, can I just eat a cow alive, right? If it's just living and I just start chomping on it, and I need it, is that okay? And the vegan has to bite the bullet and say eating a cow just alive, if as long as you need it, right? That you could just start chomping on its back, you know, hind section, and then like maybe put some saran wrap over when you're kind of done, and maybe some ice in there, and then continue later. Yeah, you should debate vegans. It would be interesting because that's not your social politics, but it is a social element. I believe the veganism, you know, you could argue it's usually a moral or ethical argument or practices. But there's a whole other part of veganism that you probably see is that they perfectly are like they're a perfect proxy outfit for sort of like the centralized control of food, and they kind of don't even see that, where, you know, the vegans should actually, who are against the kinds of methods that they're arguing against, they should actually team up with local farmers who don't do factory farming in order to set up an infrastructure that protects the central government and its corporations from taking over the supply chain. But they're not. They're playing right into the supply chain takeover. And they don't even, it's almost like they don't care. If they take over the supply chain, as long as no one's eating meat, I'm fine as a slave with my, you know, Amazon kibble delivered with a drone, you know, to my house. And
well, that's the irony of a lot of these sort of big government positions in this authoritarian. The very people that they claim, take any issue, right? Like take socialism, like Bernie Sanders, socialism, you know, democratic socialism, whatever. Like take that. Like when you start to institute these policies, it's almost always worse for the very people that, you know, they're claiming to defund the police because of black people. Okay. Well, my neighborhood in rural Pennsylvania, we're not going to see a spike in crime. You know where you're going to see a spike in crime? The very black neighborhoods that you claim to be caring about. It's funny because I think that this is where you get it right with satire, because the problem is there's always difficulty in the nuance, right? Like, for example, if I were to say to you, define woman. You could talk about gametes and you could talk about XX, but human language capabilities and labeling capabilities, it's very hard to encompass through a label all the little minute details that could exist in something. So you take out woman and man. Just be like, what is a dog? Right? It's going to be tough for you as a layman to be like, here is exactly what a dog is if we looked at their DNA structure. Like, it's tough for the layman, but you know what a dog is, and I know what a dog is. And where these authoritarians or these leftists, where they get you is like, they could argue these nuance and be like, but here's something that doesn't fit that definition you just gave me. And the correct response is to laugh at the absurdity of it. That's the correct response, because we all know what's going on.
You're actually pointing to something that I see commonly in all of these arguments, whether it's the vegan trying to do the name the trait, they always try to pull what you're actually appealing to as a universal. And what they want to do is make it a particular. And that way, if you remove the particular or point to a place where a particular property of the universal is absent, then suddenly it's not a universal. It's like a circle. It's like, here's a circle. Is that a circle? And Rob says yes. And Jimbob says yes. And then the vegan's like, get closer, though. And then there's like a little dent on the outer side. It's like, it's not a circle, is it? And we're like, you're ridiculous. Leave, right? And I think it's that trick of like, we appeal to universals, women, men, dogs, chairs. But if someone says define a chair, suddenly it gets into this like, endless debate of functionality and descriptions and properties. Where does this, you might as well say, where does the chair begin? What part of the chair does it begin, right? It's a nonsensical, malformed question. And that's why I think people who do accept universals have a more coherent worldview, right? Even if it's not fully fleshed out. If you appeal to universals and understand the function of it and the reason, and that to deny universals leads you to complete absurdity or nihilism, basically, where you're just arguing about whether the leg of a chair is actually the chair or not. And I think of this stuff and I go, okay, what's a food shortage supply? How about that? And at that point, will the chair matter, or will the definition of a dog matter? I call these problems. I do think there's a spiritual element, spiritual warfare going on. But these problems, I put them in a category called concerns that go away with food shortages. Whether it's your identity, right? Oh, you didn't say my I could imagine a meme where a country's getting bombed and and the one person saying save her, and the other person said that's not her pronoun, right? Like these things wouldn't matter, and it's like what you pointed to with like thresholds. Suddenly the thresholds change as far as what you value. The more scarcity occurs. Maybe it's like a direct relationship. Like this nonsense stuff is a luxury. We're always kind of like, we don't want like a food shortage supply or any kind of disaster. I don't want the systems to crash. I'm not one of those people who like says, sure, it's corrupt, completely annihilate it with nothing to back it up. No net, right? Nothing built. Right. But at the same time, I know that would eliminate a lot of nonsense that otherwise is just superficial riffraff, that it's meaningless. Once you're starving, it's meaningless.
One of the things I did debate, I also judged debate after I participated in. I was in this round once. It was like debating Vosh or something. These people were arguing that words don't have meaning. Everything's socially constructed, blah, blah, blah. Now, it's funny because in the game of policy debate, people talk high and mighty about how they're changing the world. They're not. They're playing a game. That's all it is. It's a game. You might learn skills that help. You might meet friendships and things that last a lifetime. It's still a game. It's no different than football. Right? But they don't want to believe that. Everyone wants to think they're high and mighty. So they all want to win, but they pretend they don't. We're fighting, prejudice. We're doing this. We're doing that. So in this particular round, the one team's going on and on and on and on, and the other team ends up conceding that words don't have meaning. And so after the round, I fill out my ballot, and then I'm expected to give a decision. And I was like, banana, run, chair, Gatorade. And they were like, what? And I just started to walk out of the room. They're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You got to tell us who won. And I was like, what does it matter? Why are the words I'm saying right now matter more than the ones I just said? Because despite what you're saying, right, you understand that these words have meaning. Now, that's a silly way to say what you just said. When it comes to the things that really matter to you in life, such as you're starving to death, all of a sudden your ability to wax philosophical in your mom's basement with your little camera in front doing your Twitch stream for the 200 people that are donating you money because you're a good grifting socialist, all of a sudden that shit don't matter, right? And you can see this, like, when they'll, as soon as one of them, like, oh yeah, we should be very careful about who we platform. We don't want to platform Jimbob or Rob or BPF, careful about that platform. And then as soon as one of them are banned or get a strike on YouTube, it's like, this is ridiculous. What happened here? It's these sorts of things. Once it personally affects you, and I find it interesting. The vegan aspect of it's a little different. I haven't debated people. I assume there are vegans that would, to some extent, make some personal sacrifice. But at the end of the day, what a lot of these people are advocating for, it's just not practical. And that's why I love it. I love, I can't believe my good fortune in having the dumbest enemies ever. When you hear them wax on about, like, wow, you're a bigot if you don't want that, 250-pound man wrestling against that, 12-year-old girl. You're ridiculous. It's like, I don't even have to say a word. Keep talking. Because all the regular normie people, they're like, yeah, that's a joke. And that's where someone like you comes in, where it's like, you just put it so concisely. They have no response to that.
Yeah, especially the meaning thing. I mean, once you go that route, it's absurd. You could say that about nothing's true. It's just a construct. And then you're like, why are you debating it? And then you ask, the word starve, it means something, right? So, regardless of the sound you make, is starving a real thing? And then, you get these types who, they're, well, that depends on what you mean by starving, like, to what extent are you dying, And it's like, what's funny about that is he's kind of like pigeoned as right, and yet he does a lot of this sort of like questioning endlessly things, right? These other things, right? It depends on what you mean by everything, right? And so that's a funny thing to interact with. Again, you don't want to get too upset because, like you said, you want to remind yourself to that there's absurdity and to take the piss out of it. But also try to do it even in a loving way, right? It's hard sometimes because you just want to like strangle some of these people. But the humor is always right there for you. And like you said, sometimes you don't have to tell the joke. You just let them talk. And maybe Andrew's really good at this. He just asks one question after their rant, and they're like,
I hate to give Andrew any props, though. I do. Right, I know he's still listening, so don't worry. We have more negative things to say. But yeah, I mean, that's what, and it's interesting. One of the things I believe is sort of, I guess I'm in a libertarian vein. A populist conservative leans libertarian, but is sort of a defender of capitalism. It's not just the idea of free markets. It's also the idea of sort of individuality and specialization. We all have different skills and different ways of looking and different ways that we approach situations. And one of the things I like about Andrew and about you is how you're approaching maybe the same sort of thing I am, but you're doing it in a complete different way. So I stay out of the drama shit. Like, I'm not going to war with Fuentes and them, really. Andrew is. I have no problem with that. Like, I think it's funny that you're approaching that on a different level. I'll try to approach, a good faith trans person. I'll have a legitimate talk and try to talk on the issues, but sometimes it's just fun to point out, and it doesn't just have to be trans, mind you. It could be anything. It could be any issue where sometimes the appropriate response is just like, like, I'm sure you've seen the meme where it's just like, source please, like all this shit where it's like, I don't need a source to say 90% of this. I don't need it. And the fact that you're asking, like, you think that that's some victory because your crowd will pat you on the back, but we all know the truth. And I think that that's, again, I wish I was better at it. I'm trying to loosen up a little because I think intuitively in real life, we all have this, right? Your buddy that comes up and says some dumb shit to you in real life and you all laugh at them, that's intuitive in each one of us. But somehow when it's like, well, we're discussing this very serious ideological issue, you lose that ability. It's like all of a sudden it's like, well, I need evidence. And debate was like that. You had to have evidence for everything. You're like, if you were going to say, a collapsing economy is bad, evidence, please. Let's see the evidence of that. And it's like, in real life, we know, like, you mean that dumbass, tried to jump into that pole from the third story. What an idiot. Like, we don't need evidence to see it. So yeah. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, the whole evidence versus evidence thing. I went through my phase, went through like a very, Ben Shapiro-y kind of phase where it's like facts against facts. My facts are better than your facts, and if you want to question my facts, you got to provide more facts that those facts are wrong. And you
That's good
realize that
impression.
just it's endless. It's endless. That's why I believe that paradigms and worldviews. That's what draws me to like the Crucible and all these other channels that actually deal with higher level questions that aren't evidence based. So, like when Rob makes a value claim about the interpretation of the evidence, there's two questions: is the interpretation of the evidence correct or not? But that's a factual kind of analysis versus a value claim about what we ought to do about it, or whether that data is an indicator of something that is morally deficient or something. Not everything is evidence based. In fact, like most of our arguments for anything are actually supported by evidence, but they're not led by evidence, because the value claim, the worldview, the oughts, the morality, the teleological priority, where we ought to go to, right? These are not evidence. These are all faith-based, and we argue them in a completely different way than we argue how to interpret evidence, right? And so this is, to me, is very interesting, and I think that maybe because of maybe the Enlightenment and the lingering philosophy there, where you kind of just took logic and all of this reasoning and everything else for granted freely because it's seemingly self-evident. There's a pragmatic use to that view, but it actually allows other people to just start constructing a lot of all arbitrary things if they just take all of that freely. Does that make sense? Where
Yeah.
the starting assumptions are never questioned, but now in these new sort of dark edges of the internet sphere, we're starting to question these fundamental things again, and I think it's throwing a wrench in a lot of different philosophies and trends as far as politics and culture, and I think that's great. I mean, it's supposed to throw a wrench in it.
And it's very difficult. It's a fine line, right? It's very difficult because you think about one of the things that, like, I'll give you an example. I hate this idea of like postmodernism that objective reality doesn't exist. I hate that everything's subjective, right? And to me, the quintessential example of this in politics was when the Brett Kavanaugh hearings were going on, and Cory Booker kept saying her truth. Her truth is that
Oprah
which
level.
is. Yeah, which is a joke, right? It's like, well, shit. Everyone's true. If everyone has to feel bad because of my truth, there's going to be an awful lot of people feeling bad because the objective. Did he rape her or not? That objective truth matters in that situation. But at the same time, like if you get bogged down in like, well, we have to look at just like the evidentiary facts. There are real truths that are subjective that we ignore, right? Because we're just bogged down in this constant search for being able to prove these objective truths that we all subjectively know to be true. So things happen. Like, let me give you a political example of this, right? Are illegal immigrants a drain on the areas they come into? Well, if I listen to left-wing sources, they say absolutely not. They're better than Americans. They're hardworking. They don't negatively affect culturally or economically. If I go to right-leaning libertarian sources like the Cato Institute, they say, yes, totally agree. They're good for the economy. They're great, blah, 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 blah. But then as soon as you say, well, okay, here's some illegal immigrants, we'll throw them in your community. Despite all the literature, they're like, well, wait a minute, that's a bit much. Us in Martha's Vineyard, we just don't have the means to take care of these people like you and your little rural towns do. And so despite that, there's a huge dearth of literature that's like how good these illegal immigrants, as soon as it shows up to their back door, and that's how we know. Like, I don't give a shit now when I debate someone and they're like, well, what about this from the Cato Institute? And what about this from the Economist? And what about this from the Brookings Institute? I'm like, I don't give a shit. Are you taking them in your house? No, because we know the truth. And so it's difficult to thread that needle where it's like, on one hand, you can't just accept people going, it doesn't matter what the objective truth is. If I feel your words have raped me, then I've been raped. That's bullshit. But on the other hand, you can't fall into that trap where it's like source please with everything and you ignore it. And so it's very difficult to navigate through this because if you're trying to approach conversations in good faith and you're like, look, someone disagrees with me, let's hash this out. It's difficult to find that fine line because you could easily find yourself me being like, well, that's not, facts don't care about your feelings. And then being like, oh, well, if that's the case, then everything, source please, which is also ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question to just ask people. I mean, what you said is you just ask them, let's say you were talking to someone in that Martha's Vineyard scenario, and and you go, did you take anyone in? Or, like you just ask these questions. I do that with vegans or anyone else who assumes some sort of like practice, and they're actually arguing for a specific kind of set of activities, right? And then you ask them if they're in those activities. I asked one of the vegans I debated said veganism isn't about practice. It's about the caring of animals and then trying to seek some expression of it. And and I'm going, okay, I'm a vegan then, and I don't have to practice. I'm vegan in between bites of my steak. I'm vegan. I'm caring. I care about the animal so much that I want to eat it. Right? I want to eat it. Like, I care so much. I want to be one with the animal. That's how connected I am. And so I think that's a great way to do it, because the facts end up, it's like listing a bunch of facts on like an argument of how we pursue health, right? And then everyone lists their facts about health, whether it's activities or reducing activities. Just the laying down of those facts doesn't establish, one, a moral ought to pursue either one. Two, it doesn't get people out of their bed to actually do it, right? And so there's this difference between knowledge and action, right? And people think maybe they get off on just laying knowledge down on people and data and feeling like they brought the gavel down, but there's no practice and they're kind of fine with it. Maybe they're like, that was enough of a cortisol and a dopamine spike. I'm done for the day. I'm gonna get I need a beer or something like that. And I think that's kind of like something that occurs on the online sphere too. And I'm always reminded of it too, that, to live the life that you're arguing for as well.
That's more important, right? To me, it's more important to your actions than your words, right? And this is one of the things that pisses me off about the socialists so much, right? Where it's always, they feel, right? To me, the big divide between like people that are on the right and sort of more liberty-minded and the socialist is this. You were talking about this earlier, like sort of well, I'm cheering for my team and I'm voting. That means I'm doing something. Like, you'll talk to these people and they'll be like, well, we should give up our money. We should, the rich should pay more taxes. It's like, okay, do it. Right? Like, if you send a check to the IRS, they'll cash the damn check, do it. Right? And they're always like, well, that's not important. What's important is that I voted the right way. And it's like, could you do less? 100 out of 100 times, I would rather take someone that says, listen, I don't think that we should compel you to do anything, but I myself, out of my own code of ethics and morality, choose to behave in this way. To me, that is always the guy giving homeless people money and going to the soup shelter, but voting to say, look, I don't think we should have these massive programs, is always going to be preferable to me than the person virtue signaling, well, I voted for Bernie Sanders, so who gives a shit if I step over that homeless person on the street? And they derive this sense of morality where it's like, well, it doesn't matter what my act, like you were saying about the vegan example there, where it's like, it doesn't matter if I'm a hypocrite or what my actions do. I'm focused on this greater truth in life. And the greater truth is, how do we massively change the world? When the truth is the exact opposite. What you do in your day-to-day life with your friends and family has more impact than the great thoughts that you think you're having. And it's amazing to see sort of that play out in these big government authoritarians where they think that somehow, it's fine to say, if me and you have, if I'm a socialist and you're, against that, and I'm like, this is why I practically think this is a better society, that's fine. But I don't get to derive morality from, well, I'm more moral than you because I believe this, but I don't act like that unless I'm compelled through force.
Right, yeah, you actually want, if you're arguing for morality, and let's say you even have a coherent position and foundation for it, if what actually impacts people is kind of a person-person phenomenon, like it's not actually like evidence or empiricism or argumentation a lot of times. Some people will abandon a view if you completely destroy it and they're honest about that. Wow, they don't have an answer for this stuff, but how they behave is how we actually impact people. And this kind of, just think about everybody who turned their screens black, right, for BLM and then donated money. And then to them, it's enough. Just the gesture alone. It's like a John Lennon sort of like view of like one to abstract many impact where, you just send the signal out. The energy will go out and it'll find its way. And I got to get to an appointment now. And you realize it's that nobody's impacted that way. We're impacted interpersonally. Like we're moved by people in action that we see directly and we go, wow, that. We're not impacted, we don't impact directly sending a big check to a faceless corporate entity even that we don't see what it does, right? And we don't see how it impacts anybody. We just feel good. It's like an inversion of like tithing for church. It's just like
Right.
people want to donate, but they don't need to see where it goes. And so, the basket goes around, and if they're not a part of a church, they kind of co-opt social activism as their church, and they kind of do what they do. And that's not peculiar to the left either. There's definitely a trademark conservatism that's going on that's similar. They just have a different virtue. There seems to be this they're kind of matching each other now with identity politics in some of these on some of these platforms.
I know it's tough, right? Because you're pushing against the insanity of the left, but you don't want the pendulum to swing so back forth that you replace one monster with the next. So it does become difficult.
Yeah, it's like Charlie Kirk is like, we got to fight this agenda, and he takes a photo with like some trans dude doing a high kick on his shoulder, and he's like, our trans are based or something like that. Like, if you're going to argue against something like morally based that's bigger than politics, you can't, this weirdness of like co-opting the behaviors that you're arguing against, but because these people share your economic views, that suddenly, and again, you might disagree because you're a libertarian. So, like a small government,
you're right
do what you do.
Right. You're right in principle, right? That you don't sacrifice your principles because, there's this. You can acknowledge that there are allies that you disagree with on certain things, but the difference is, I think, is the moral claim. Right? There is the strategy claim, which is different, right? Like saying like, I want my side to win, so I will accept people that I don't agree with morally or philosophically on this issue. That's one thing. I don't begrudge anyone that. But the difference is that morality claim, right? Where it's like, something that I consider immoral, all of a sudden I forgive because they agree with me on this issue. That to me is what's beyond the pale.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen a lot of it, and you want to be consistent there. And again, that doesn't mean like you don't, to some extent, you could not interact with certain behaviors and subcultures of people who do stuff. You're associated with some behavior you don't want to be. But as far as like interacting one-on-one, I've interacted with a whole variety of people whose lifestyle I completely reject, I argue against, I make judgments about, but I don't like judge their heart. I judge behaviors and activities, and I can argue against them. And but that doesn't mean I'm just like outwardly just vicious, right? Unless I'm defending myself, then I can get very vicious. But yeah, that's the whole point, is that you don't abandon. And I've seen that on the right. It's like, they've been against all of these things. And sudden, and regardless of your take on this, I'm just expressing my views that like, Dave and Dave, they announced they're going to have these babies, and the whole right trademark wing that's been arguing against progressivism, this kind of like inversion and perversion of the family and redesigning what things are as far as roles in the world and such. They're suddenly just like celebrating. And again, regardless of your view or the listener's view, the criticism is people who are holding a specific view before and now completely upending it just because there's like a currency, right? I kind of see it as like an availability cascade where there's this confidence in a wave, and you ride the wave and then you justify it afterwards because you go, well, no, we had to do that, right? And we've seen this with any even political leaders we voted for, like as much as Trump was hilarious and as much as it would be hilarious to have him back, people, I've witnessed people who are totally against all of this, like very authority driven we say prick? And then suddenly they're a champion of it because Trump, pushed it through or something. And before
fiscal concern, balance the budget. Oh, Trump's blowing out the budget now. It's okay. Yeah. It's our guy. It's fine.
Yeah. And you just see this as rampant. And I think that's, I don't know. I think it just shows that people are more of a part of a team. And I don't blame people for trying to follow that inclination or that draw to team, to camaraderie, to a jersey, right? To some sort of, you know, you're a part of something. We are individuals, but we seek groups too. Like it's this one and many problem that we have. And so I don't blame people for putting on the jersey because they want to win, and it's fun to win and then talk shit when you win. But you just gotta have to look at it further, because it's gonna turn, and it's gonna be based on trend. And as soon as the trend turns on your team, suddenly your convictions must change, or you have to abandon the team, and that's really kind of frightening for people, right? Because I was a part of this, and then the what do you call it, the Overton window changed, and it's like, I didn't expect this, and then they're like, well, you're either gonna come with us or you're out, right? So you have these choices, and then they go off, right? That happened with me with like being a default Democrat liberal in LA, where I was like, this is a sinking ship. And libertarian and classical liberalism was my like safety raft where I could jump off, but it's not a full ship of its own. It doesn't have as big logos and stuff. And it was kind of like a treading water position for me. It was like an interim place to rest. And then I was like, you know, drawn to the right wing ship. And then I realized, there's something not so right about this, but it's more right than that other thing. And I don't even know where I am now, honestly. I'm like, I'm not apolitical. I'm definitely right wing. I probably am more right wing than the right wing conception, at least in media. And I think a lot of us are versions of this in our own regard. Like, you know, even you, a libertarian, might look at what is considered authorized libertarianism in the media and who gets to stand in as there are definitely rules, by the way, of who gets to go up the ladder of libertarianism and speak on behalf of the philosophy and such. And, you know, you start to see, well, wow, everyone, you know, it's almost like the more effort you are to legitimize yourself and be consistent, the less, boats there are to go on, or the smaller the boats, let's say, to go on.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'll just say this in closing. Like the truth is, these issues matter. Politics matters. Culture matters. Right. I think your family, your friends, your personal stuff is most important. But at the end of the day, no matter how much effect that you may ever have in discourse and voting and things like that, your integrity matters more. And so if you're selling out, or you're willing to go against your like code of ethics and morality, whatever that may be, right? If you're willing to say, you know, I think it was bad when Democrats did this. Oh, but now it's my side, so it's okay now. Like that shit, you're selling out. Like that's what you're doing at the end of the day. And that's more damaging than any good you're going to cause. Because if you have any sort of self-respect whatsoever, you got to look at yourself in the mirror at the end of the day. So we all have some amount of hypocrisy. That's absolutely true. But our goal should be to try to hold ourselves first and foremost to a standard. And sometimes that means that you have to say things that are difficult. You have to say, this thing that I pushed for, or this party, or this person that I pushed for is fucking up, right? They did something really wrong here. And, you know, I'm not doing that today, because today is me being a cheerleader for Republicans getting elected Tuesday. But that's how I try to carry myself. It's our greatest strength and greatest weakness, having personal integrity. Like it's the strength that at the end of the day, that makes you a better person. But it's also a weakness, because people that don't share that integrity exploit it. They'll say, we'll focus when your side does something wrong, but when we do it, we'll totally ignore it. We're not going to hold ourselves to that standard. So I'll leave you wrap up. I'll leave you have the last word here. But yeah, I think it's an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would say add to that is that it's worth being ostracized to say the truth, because if enough people say the truth and get ostracized, well, there's that now a bundle of people who say the truth, and then you have a new a group of people. You might disagree on other particulars and stuff, but this kind of like fear of saying standing up against your own team, you know, and you get all these pressure people going, stop infighting. We need to just like put away your smaller differences. And then you go, well, no, it's a big difference. It actually matters. Right. And they go, well, it's just not going to work out. And you go, you have to be able to say fine, right? Because that short term of ostracization and you know, loneliness is very short term. And it's more fun to argue rigorously, right, for the truth and uphold your standards the best you can. And again, Rob said, we fail, we fall, and you know, in my view, we repent if it's like a sinful thing. But in general, it's like it's not worth losing your integrity, because then whatever you gain, in other words, if you have to abandon your moral convictions to seek an outcome, whatever the outcome is, you won't experience the same way as you imagined it.
That's right. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jimbob. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, we'll interact again soon, probably on the Crucible. But yeah, look forward to seeing more from you. Everybody, check out Jimbob, and thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. See ya.
Talk to you soon. Bye. All right.